Welcome to We Are Women Unapologetically, the podcast that talks about the good, bad, ugly, and awesome. Careers, life transitions, confidence, and everything in between. Because shift happens, but you don't have to do it alone.
Hello and welcome to We Are Women Unapologetically. My name is Jessica Cumming, and today I am accompanied by Maartje van Krieken, a Dutch seasoned executive and host of the Business Emergency Room podcast, where she helps leaders triage chaos and steer their organizations towards stability and growth. With 20 plus years experience leading global multi-billion-dollar initiatives from Iraq to India to New Orleans, her current base, she now guides mid-market B2B companies as a fractional CEO, COO, CSO through Chaos Games Consulting. She focuses on triage, decision-making mechanics, people dynamics, and closing the gap to potential. She is also an entrepreneur, investor, a skipper, and a mom to 3 teens. Maartje, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Hey, Jessica, thank you so much for having me.
That intro is jam-packed. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today?
So I'm originally a Dutch girl. I grew up in Amsterdam and then did a couple of decades as an engineer in oil and gas. Oil and gas is typically not to be found in the most attractive places, and I worked frontier projects. So I definitely worked in all the strange places. And I love that career, and I love the work and the challenges that came with it. And what I really loved was the chaos that was in these jobs and the messy complexity of working with so many different people and organizations, with so many different cultures, and with a new challenge every day. I did well in that career, but ended up in the level of leadership where there was very few women. There's very few women in that industry anyway. I'm not cut out to be a poster child. So there was some misalignment on what my career objectives were and where the company wanted to take me. And I wanted to continue what I was doing. I left and did for a couple of years the most random collection of projects, continuing to move all around the world, taking on stuff that came on my path or that people approached me with. And since 2 years, I now have teens, so I need to stay put for a while in one place, which is what I'm trying to do in New Orleans. So since 2 years, I really carved out with much more intent a business around that triage. I've not been one that's fitted ever neatly in a box, but if it's messy and complex and it's in the B2B space, and it's the point where people put their hands in their hair and say, okay, I know I don't want this, but I also don't know where to start. Or what do we do now? That's where I fit.
Going back into your story, when you first got into oil and gas, what would you say were some of the most challenging things for you? Not only knowing that it was misaligned potentially, but also just being a woman in a male-dominated industry.
Yeah, I studied industrial design engineering, which is about design of very pretty consumer goods, right? And user interfaces or medical prostheses. So things that are very close to humans. And I did innovation management therein. And then I ended up with a company in natural gases in heavy industry in the port of Rotterdam, which is one of the biggest ports in the world. But I also had a boyfriend who was working in oil and gas. I went to university where everybody does engineering. So all of my friends were in more technical roles. And I was doing well in that gas company, but it was a German company. And the only place to go was the headquarters in Germany. My boyfriend wasn't working in the Netherlands. And so I was like, okay, maybe I should try to get an international staff position with an oil company, because then we can go somewhere together. Even if it's not the place where he currently is, we can go somewhere else where there's oil and gas. So that's what I did. There was still an assessment center that you could go to where they specifically targeted international staff. And I made it through. Real story is I actually didn't make it through. You're supposed to score 100 points. And I scored 99 points. But the recruiter, South African lady, she was fabulous. She says, we need people like you. And I'm going to not care about this 1 point, and I'm going to find you a position. And she says, I'm making my own life really difficult because you don't fit any of the positions that I have because you're a bit of a weirdo how you came into this. But I need you. So I didn't actually make it through, but I made it through. But that label, the weirdo, that was the struggle because my university was already very male dominated, right? There was less than 20% women. So that wasn't necessarily new. I was in a location where the population was quite young. But as soon as I moved to that frontier project space, the average age was like 50, right? And I was in my 20s. So then suddenly you're also dealing with a whole generational issue. And you're dealing with an issue that you're working in countries where culturally women also have a different place. So then it became a lot more stark. There's challenges with that. I don't necessarily think that that was the hardest. I think my weirdoness was harder because a big multinational like that has these career ladders, right? And I knew nothing about oil and gas. And so by virtue of finding me a first position that sort of fitted, that allowed me to come in, I had entered this career ladder, which is okay, but also not my dream. But I also didn't know what else. So I made some shifts, but I didn't really fit ever in one. And it wasn't until some major upheaval whilst I was based out in Russia that I realized that maybe there was a space to carve out a career between those ladders. That wasn't necessarily going to be easy, but that potentially was also the only place I was going to be happy because I just forever didn't fit, right? I felt like the weirdo in a bad way all that time. And not necessarily because I was a girl. I was just like, I'm just not that excited to just do this. I want to do this, but also touch that and also play in this. And I wanted to be everywhere a little bit.
I love that explanation of you were in one role, but you also liked other roles and you were trying to carve your own path. That's a very scary thing to do. When the path isn't laid out, you are taking your own path. You are taking a risk to see if it's going to work out. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and maybe give any advice to someone that's out there saying, I am in this career path, I like parts of it, but I really like these other things?
Yeah, I think there's two very fundamental things that happened. I was working on a project in Eastern Russia. So these are islands north of Japan, right? They're closer to Alaska than Europe. It's the other end of Russia for us Europeans. We jokingly say that's the part of Russia that Sarah Palin claims she could see from her bedroom. It's in the middle of nowhere, though. And the island has 200,000 citizens. And then you show up with this major oil and gas development. So it's a weird place to be. It's almost like probably equivalent of military bases and stuff that are in the middle of nowhere. And your social life is your colleagues and your work. And the pressure on that project was insane. So the blame gaming was insane. It was uncomfortable. It was 80-hour weeks. It was also 90% men and then single men and then very pretty local ladies. And everything about it was not so simple. I had a fabulous life there, but work-wise, it was very complicated. I was in a very weird dynamic. I was maybe also a little naive. I was in a job that was a couple of grades above what I was, but I've been thrown in at the deep end and was trying to manage an over $1 billion contract portfolio, and none of it was simple. And then I found some non-compliances and started to escalate these, and I didn't realize who was all involved. I just was maybe too curious or too loud for my own good, but it was very uncomfortable. I'd gotten pregnant, which was somewhat unplanned, because although I finally decided I wanted children, I didn't realize I'd be pregnant within 3 weeks of that decision. So I couldn't say anything, because you're not supposed to have babies there. And I'm also like, well, let's see if this evolves. I then lost that baby very late and ended up in the most horrible depression at the same time that everything at work exploded. And so it was like, I need to get out. I also want to get into a slightly different part of the company because there's some individuals there that are going to be around and I need a change of scenery. So that enabled me the ability to do that. At the same time, somebody had pointed out to me that I was potentially happier if I played in the gray between the ladders. What he said to me is that will work because there is always space for integrators and connectors in the business. He said, if you are okay that every time we do a restructuring or a reorg and they need to put people in boxes, you're going to be uncomfortable longer than anybody else because you won't fit anywhere. Remember that conversation so vividly, and it's quite a while ago. was probably 2008. So those two things were the main contributors to make a different place in the organization to be and to exist.
You've already mentioned a couple of different places that you have been. Where all has your career taken?
So the decision that this is what I wanted, this career that would take me everywhere, actually came from when I was 12. So I grew up in a town in the Netherlands that has one of the 3 boarding houses that exist in the Netherlands. And so all these kids also went to my school because those are not boarding schools, they're boarding houses, and the kids go into the normal school system. And they were all in my class. And they were living everywhere, right? They had been living everywhere. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, that's what I want. I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. All I knew is that I wanted to live and work everywhere. And I still want that. So that was not a whim at 12, right? That's still how I want to live my life. Working as international staff, the whole idea is that you move every couple of years to a new project or a new something. Relatively early on, I also took on a development position for a year and a half, which was with a global team that did global project excellence stuff. I traveled 220 days the first year I was in that team. I think at that age, I think I was at the right age, the right time in my life. It also meant that I'd seen all these operating locations of the company. I've been almost everywhere. And so that made it a little easier to help with the job search every time it was our time to move. In that year, I really did all the continents, and I did sometimes these 2 or 3 week stints in Nigeria. So I didn't live there, but I spent considerable repeatedly time there. And the same thing in places like Qatar or Brazil or Brunei, which is tiny place somewhere wedged between Indonesia and Australia. And then I actually lived and worked in Russia and in India. I worked on a project in Iraq for a long time, but I also lived in Scotland and I lived in Houston and I worked in Bakersfield.
You really have been everywhere. And I heard you mention all the continents as well.
Yeah.
Have you been able to make it to Antarctica?
No, that's on the
No,
list.
okay. That's on my list too. The only
Yeah.
one that I haven't been to as well. When we're talking about different continents and how development has been changing, mentioned that you would look at already moving if you didn't have teens. Do you think that it still is easy to go abroad today as it has been in years past? And do you still feel as safe doing it today?
Yes, I think people who grow up in a smaller bubble, sometimes it's not even that. I know people who live in very worldly places, who live in New York and then think that New Orleans is the unsafest place in the world. People have just very different perspectives. Yes, I feel very safe because I think there's some very conventional rules to things and there's weirdos everywhere, right? Stupid stuff has happened to me in the town I grew up, which is one of the richest towns that exists in the Netherlands, and where crime rates are nothing and stuff happened. And then I've walked around in Nigeria and I've worked in Iraq, and it doesn't necessarily work that way. I think you can plan around that. I do think that the type of career I had when I started, I didn't think it would last my time. It exists a little bit in some form still, but not really. There is certain industries and certain types of jobs that lend themselves to having an international career. And so I think I very consciously carved that out, and I have a mobile career. So yeah, I think that for me, it's still possible, but it's probably harder to start out, although there's also opportunities that weren't there before, right? I worked in an industry that was already doing a lot of virtual remote work always, way ahead of the times. Yes, there's more opportunities, but the paperwork and visa part at the moment, those mountains seem to be growing, let's put it that way, and shouldn't be underestimated. It can be really hard to get the appropriate paperwork to actually exist somewhere.
Would you have any advice for someone that has never traveled overseas for work, but is looking into doing something like that?
I've seen in my life 3 types of people, right, who do this. I see people who think they want this, and then they do this once, and within a year or 2 years, it's just like, no, 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 no. That was a mistake. Then there is a group that moves once or maybe twice and then settles in a new place forever. And there's quite a lot of those people. The global nomads like me who have moved, 10 times in 20 years, whatever it was, that group is small. And that takes a certain type of person. And the challenge is that the world isn't geared up that way, right? Particularly if you have kids or stuff. I grew up with kids who'd lived that life, and I'd seen some kids who, as teenagers, were living in that boarding house and were very messed up from the fact that they were not with their parents. But I've also seen parents come back home to put their kids to school somewhere and being actually so frustrated that they had to interrupt their dreams because it felt like that. It's a compromise as a family. So it's not so simple. So my advice would be, if you have that bug, the only way it goes is if you try. And if you've never really traveled, to me as a European, that's also a little hard, easy to say or hard, but it's like, okay, at least make a trip that's not American style, 5 countries in 3 days. Go to one place, book an Airbnb in a local place and just be there, right? Take also 3 or 4 days where you're just going to the local bakery and kind of go like, okay, how would I go about meeting people here? How frustrating would I find it not really speaking the language or stuff, to just get a bit of a feel? Because holiday is very different than actually living somewhere. And you're going to have to spend some energy to meet people and make friends and get your life going in a new place. And it can be very rewarding, but don't assume that you're transporting your life from here to there and keep it the same. If that's what you want, you should stay where you are.
I love that advice because I have traveled extensively as well. I've lived in different places and I've done long-term assignments, short-term compared to you, but I have done some assignments in Asia, different parts of Europe. So I have done that as well. And I can tell you that the more you submerge yourself into the lifestyle of the locals, the more comforting it can become. And what you said, as far as a vacation, even getting an Airbnb and putting yourself in that country for a little bit. But I do have to say, because you mentioned it and it made me laugh a little bit, is the whole American vacation of Europe is like 3 countries in 5 days. I did that about 2 years ago. I only had a week and I ended up doing 4 countries in 5 days. And it was the most chaotic time. But I also knew that that trip in particular was a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. So I did go ahead and do it, but I highly discourage anyone to do it that way.
There's nothing wrong with that if you're doing that to see things and to see the sights. But let's also agree that's a very curated experience. So that can be fabulous, but that is not going to show you whether you could be somewhere. And if you really enjoy that, then just do a lot of that and work at home to pay for it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And like I said, this was a once in a lifetime thing. I would never do it that way again. But I did get to see a lot of different things in a short period of time. And for that particular trip, it definitely was the goal.
Yeah.
Out of all of the places that you have lived, which country has been your favorite besides home?
New Orleans is the only place I've ever lived twice. We also lived 4.5 years in India, and I was good to go when we left, but I probably wouldn't mind being back there for a couple of years again. Also, I don't actually think that there is a country where I would put down any forever roots ever. We have a place in the French Alps because we are so nomadic, so that we at least had a base in Europe. That's kind of been the same. We've had that place 12 years now. I don't necessarily see myself live there for big chunks of the year. If we get to that point, I probably would sell that place and find something else again. It's too quiet. It's too remote. Yeah, I need a livelihood around me. So maybe that's the common denominator, right? In India, you're never alone. It's very full. And New Orleans is 24/7. Where I grew up is 24/7. I don't need massive, but I do need a buzz.
Which part of India were you in?
We were in Bangalore, which is in the south. Yeah, it's
Okay.
kind of 200 miles from Old Coast. The benefit is that it's a big import city, right? It's actually not so uncomparable to Houston. When we lived in Houston, Houston wasn't huge. The bigger Houston area was 4 million. I think it's 12 now. It's bigger than Chicago. But there was very few people who are from Houston, right? There's a lot of people who migrated to Houston to work, and the same in Bangalore, which means that there was always people coming into the city who need to start over and meet new friends and meet new people, which is much easier than if you're in a town where everybody asks where you went to high school. Because they need that to place you, right? If as an outsider, that's much harder to fit in at times.
As someone who grew up in a town where my graduating class was 36 people, I do know what it's like to make new friends there because I didn't live there my whole life. But then I also understand what you're saying in regards to Bangalore because I have done a couple of short-term assignments there and I found the people so welcoming. But I also found that there were so many foreign people coming in. Matter of fact, I randomly ended up there for a very short stint. It was 2 weeks. I was doing some training over there. And all of a sudden, I got a message from a woman that I know, and I've known her since I was 3 or 4 years old. She was an exchange student from Sweden in the US back then. And come to find out, she was in Bangalore for work. And so we got to meet up, and I hadn't seen her in probably 30 or 35 years. And what are the odds that we are in Bangalore at the same time? But to your point, when you are in a bigger city, when you're in a city that's known for a hub of either imports or a tech hub, it can be a great place to make friends.
Yeah. But it's also for the locals, right? So I had my third child whilst we were living in India, and I was in the leadership team locally, and we would have twice a year batches of graduates joining the organization. And so we would have this onboarding week, and I would always do a talk to them about the transition from student life to working life and stuff. And I started often my talk with a bit of a joke saying, I'm the white lady here. But I said, I dare to claim that I'm more local than any of you. And they would all be like, well, because the whole intent I was trying to make is that, listen, we were there as a global support hub, right? So it was about supporting all these different organizations. And so the point was about, you don't know what you don't know about people, right? And so let's not assume all these things. And they would all bristle if I'd say that. But then I said to them, I said, okay, how many of you grew up in Bangalore? Right? And then I would say, okay, how many of you grew up in a 2-hour radius of the city or regularly came here? It's like nobody. And I'm like, hey, my kid is a Bangalorean, right? I'm more local than any of you. I have more blood ties to this place. But it makes the point, right? So it was also, from an Indian perspective, not a place that a lot of people that were living there called home. We also had a lot of non-expat friends. So in general, the whole culture was about new groups of people who were not co-located with their extended families, who were looking to build a life, right? With their kids, with their families and their careers. As an expat, somebody who lives their lives like me, that's an attractive place because it's infinitely easier to start a new life there than in a place like Pittsburgh. No offense, but yeah, it's not quite the same dynamic.
Definitely not the same dynamic. I have been to both and I can tell you it's not the same. What would you say have been some of your biggest challenges moving from place to place?
I'd say that the moving from place to place in itself, I like, right? If you ask my husband, especially the change part, he doesn't like. He likes this lifestyle, but if he could not do the first 3 months of a new place, I think he would be really happy. Just getting settled and getting everything, your phones in your house and stuff. And all. If you work for the same boss and you change jobs, it's sometimes already really hard to be done with the last job and already be in the new job, right? But imagine doing that when you're in different continents and you're also moving your whole house and putting your kids in new schools, and you need new doctors and you need a new car and you need a new phone, you need all of these things. And you're also still sort of finishing up the last job and starting out the new job, and you want to show up at the new job and show that you're serious and that you're ambitious and you want to do well in the new job, but your whole life is in disarray. So I think those transitions at times have been hard. You get better at it, but it's been the hard part about the moving. It's also sad at times to say goodbye, right? But then I have many friends that I'm still friends with. We just live on different continents and we see each other less frequent, but doesn't make the friendship any less. Yeah. I just see way more benefits than downsides from any of it.
You definitely are the definition of a nomad. I commend you for that. I appreciate the lifestyle. I have not done it to your extent, but I know that it takes work and it takes dedication. You
Yeah.
mentioned that one of your children was born in India. Where were your other children born?
The other two are Texans.
Okay, they are Texans.
Yes, so
Okay,
I have two Texans. The third one is Dutch because in India you don't get a passport just by virtue of being born there.
okay.
Yeah.
Very
But he will
interesting.
tell you he's Indian. If you ask him, where are you from? He says, from India.
I'm sure that probably gets a couple of looks as well, but it's true.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and then I had a first pregnancy in Eastern Russia. And I lost that baby about 4.5 months in, so that was not so simple.
That's where I was actually going next. What was that experience like? Women right now, when they're looking at their first pregnancy, the odds of a miscarriage are around 50%, if not higher. Going through something like that, what was your support system like when you were in northern Russia? You weren't by your family. You
Yeah.
already mentioned the dynamics of the city, the people that you were working with, and the locals. Would you share a little bit about your experience and,
Yeah.
for anyone out there that's been through this or potentially even going through this, what would you share with them?
I didn't know if I wanted to be a mom. I have a very complicated relationship with my own mother, and I was very afraid of repeating history. When my husband proposed to me, I said to him, if you're sure you want kids, then I'm not going to say yes. I really don't know. But at some point, I decided that with him, we'd also both been told that we'd had potentially some reduced chances of getting pregnant. And so we were going in our second and last year on that project. I had an implant. And so I had that taken out because we were like, okay, it's going to take some time. But then, as I said, I was pregnant in no time. So then I was there and it was like, okay, what do we do now? So there was a lot of drinking going on. So I had some really good friends who would take care of my drinks and water down apple juice instead of my typical white wines and other things. And I was drinking gin tonics without gin. And so I kept it hidden because also you don't know, right? So we let it run, and kept it hidden, which was not so simple. And then there was a doctor on the island who that's established I was pregnant. It was an emergency clinic. And so he checked me out. But then he said, well, ultimately, you need to leave the island to get your first trimester check done. We were working crazy hours for both my husband and I to kind of get time off at the same time to go somewhere. So that didn't happen till 4.5 months in. And we actually went to Houston, where we later ended up. And we went in for a checkup, and the baby's heart had stopped beating probably within days before us getting there. So the baby had grown to a 4.5-month-old fetus. So they did blood tests, sent me away for a weekend, which was awful, just to be sure. So I was walking around Houston trying to meet up with friends. We'd assumed it was going to be a party and celebrating we were pregnant. We could tell people. And instead it was like, we have to go back Monday morning. I went back Monday morning. They did a DNC. And then Tuesday, my husband had to stay for work. So on Tuesday, I flew back all by myself. So I went into the hospital at 8 a.m. for a checkup that the surgery had gone well. And then I was back on a plane, arriving on the island, where apart from the 2-3 friends, nobody even known I had been pregnant. And it's also a bit stupid to start telling them then. It was pretty impossible. I think between my husband and I, we also dealt with it very differently, which is very common. I was in an impossible situation at work, which was not all because of me, but also it was ugly and nasty. And people just don't want to really deal with that. There was no good answers to any of that either. So I ended up in a really deep depression. I found another job reasonably quickly. So I left the island before my husband did to transition to this new job, but then was in limbo because of visa paperwork for a couple of months. And in that period, I was suicidal and drinking like crazy. I saw my husband exactly once in that 2-month period because he came back to Europe to try and see me, but it'd been difficult, right? And he was still busy trying to find a job, but his move window wasn't the same as mine. We saw each other once and that was enough. But before he joined me in the new location, I was already pregnant again. And I found out very quickly. So that turned everything around because then it was like, okay, apparently I am meant to be pregnant. I also realized I get pregnant like this because they told me it would take a while after losing the baby. And so I think that's the thing that really pulled me out. But yeah, the beginning of that pregnancy wasn't easy or simple or nice either, right? Because you're so worried that it's going to happen again. And yeah, and things were fine. I do think the trauma of the whole episode took a lot longer after that because we didn't really deal with anything. My husband was definitely affected by it. I was affected by it. We didn't really deal with it together. I didn't really deal with it with anybody else. I was in a really bad place and then was pregnant again, which is like, okay, I'm responsible for this. I cannot keep wallowing in pity. I'm now responsible to make a healthy baby. And so, yeah, that turnaround was forced. And I think time healed a lot. I think I did not work through this in any healthy way, but I'm also not sure the scenario was in what would have been more helpful or more healthy, right? Because telling your friends at home when there is a 9-hour time difference, how are they supposed to help you or support you, right? It was just simply that the group of people around me in that period was small. And then I was by myself because in limbo between moves. And then you're in a place with new people where you don't know anybody. You're not going to dump this on anybody. So I probably should have had some professional help. But yeah, in that transition, I did not have the support network to logically place this anywhere.
Thank you for being so raw and honest and vulnerable with your story, because I know that regardless of time, and yes, as you mentioned, time can start to heal, but it's still something very traumatic that you went through. So thank you. What do you wish you potentially could have done differently? You mentioned professional help, but is there anything else that you would give as advice to others?
Yeah, I think my husband and I both say that we should have talked much more to each other, right? That the fact that it is logical that you process this very differently for him, it was also so much less real, of course, right? And I don't think I did a good job explaining the impact on me and how it made me feel. And I think he was missing a lot of context and didn't know how to help me and probably tried, but also had his own grief. And so I think we should have at least talked way more than we did. We did that a lot later. And yeah, professional help, but also giving yourself the time and the space and the grace. And I think it's complicated because I think it's becoming more complicated because there's so much less allowed in this space. So in the current climate, I would have had to carry that baby until I had a natural miscarriage or at least longer. I had a weekend with it, right? Which was already awful. Oh, yeah, I think in these situations, you need so much more support than you think. But it's also okay that it's maybe not your best friends, because I do think you probably need support from people that are a bit further removed. And that's why I don't mind talking about it, because I do think it's so much more common than anybody knows. If somebody comes to talk to me because they've just gone through a similar situation and I don't know them, I'm happy to have that conversation or to listen. And if I then never hear from somebody again, that's also okay, right? I think your support can come from very incidental, temporary sources, and that's also okay because it just needs to come out when it comes out. Yeah.
I completely agree with you on that. And thank you. I personally know women that have gone through multiple miscarriages, that have to go through the D&C multiple times as a result of it. But as you mentioned, in the climate that we are in today, especially in the US, it is different state by state. The laws are different. How long a woman has to go in a situation like this varies. For any of the women out there that are going through it, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to talk to someone. Don't be ashamed of what you're going through. I think that that would probably be the other thing.
Yeah.
At any point in time, did you feel any resentment or shame for what you were going through against your body?
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was thinking about when you were just talking, that you feel betrayed by your body, right? It's like, okay, clearly my body has no issue. We failed every birth control. I get pregnant like that, right? Apparently it has no issues in that department. But then it really felt like, okay, is there not enough quality control down there? And what's happening? And we don't know, right? That's the whole thing. You can make yourself pretty crazy like that. And I think for me, that changed because I had 3 more pregnancies and I had really easy pregnancies and I had really easy deliveries and I have very healthy babies. And I have a sister who doesn't look like me at all, but of course is genetically coming from the same source, who has really hard pregnancies and really hard deliveries and has 2 fabulous boys. And so it's like, okay, I had my course correction in that, but at the time I definitely totally felt. Yeah, I didn't speak to enough people about it, but I've had at times people suggest to me that because of I had the implant thing, saying, oh, it happens a lot more after you've had that and stuff. I don't know why there's people who feel like they need to say something like that, as if that's any consolation, because it's not. It really is not. So even if you've seen reports that that's true, what's the sense in still saying that after it happened? That's not giving anybody any help. I feel very strong about some of those comments.
Is it going to help the situation by saying something like that? No. At that point, it's happened. There's nothing that can change it. I agree with you on that 100%. I wanted to take a step back real quick because something else that you had mentioned earlier is that you didn't even know if you wanted to have children because of the relationship with your own mother.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically changed your mind, and did your relationship with your mother change at all after you decided to get pregnant?
I think time changed things, right? I was getting more into my own, finding myself. I have a really, really close relationship with one of my mom's sisters who doesn't have children. I have a really fabulous husband. We'd been together for quite a long time before we had kids also. I was seeing other friends and people around me with kids, and I met some really dysfunctional people who had really great parents. I met some really fabulous people who also had really weird parents, right? And I'm like, okay, there is something, I have some level of control there too, right? On how I go about it. So I would like to say it was gradual, and then it suddenly was this point. And the funny thing was, it wasn't even a discussion with my husband. I knew that if I'd said yes, he'd be up for it. So the conversation was literally, actually, I kind of think I do. And I was like, okay. And that went right. It was not like any reassessment of our life. And then when I had the miscarriage, I thought that was maybe a sign that I gotten it wrong. And that really helped into the depression. But then, of course, I was pregnant again in no time. And that was not planned. They told me it was going to take a lot longer, but we also actually failed birth control. That kid shouldn't have been. But then it's like, okay, well, I guess I am, right? And it was there and then that I did decide that if I wanted to, I'm very susceptible to other people's opinions and what I think are other people's opinions, and trying to please even the invisible them and they, right? I did around kids really very consciously decide that if I was going to do this successfully, I was going to have to figure out a way to have peace with my decisions around, parenting and raising kids. Because if I was going to allow in every little piece of comment or advice, I would probably go nuts and keep circling back to, oh, did I do the right thing? That's actually also in real life much easier when kids are small than when they're now emotional, hormonal teenagers, and the conversations are a lot more complex. But there's also a lot more water under the bridge and a lot more time has passed. It did not fundamentally change how I feel about the challenge that exists between me and my mother. My mother is in my kids' lives and is on and off been a good part of my life too. She is a really fabulous grandmother. My kids have a good relationship with their grandmother and enjoy being with her. And yeah, she's part of their life.
At the end of the day, you're able to make sure that they have their grandmother in their life, and you're living your life in a place where you are at peace with it. Is there a topic or a question that I have not asked you that you would like to have a conversation about?
I get asked a lot of questions about how I had 3 kids whilst I was working in all these places, right? In big jobs. I don't necessarily want to talk about that. Where my pain point with some of my colleagues came from is that I had a lot of male colleagues who were like, oh, we need to deal with working moms coming back to the workplace. And why don't you tell them how you do it? I'm allergic to being the poster child, but I also think in the working mother space, or in general, in this whole work life balance thing, there is not a blueprint, right? Because it's so personal. And for a while, I would push back when it's like, oh, can you come and stand on this stage? Can you go to this conference? Can you talk about being a woman in the oil industry and then having kids? I do think that I managed to find some kind of balance that I'm, as you say, indeed at peace with, right? I'm at peace with my choices. And that's the thing you need to figure out. And that takes time. And I think at times I didn't give myself enough grace and I wasn't kind enough to myself whilst I'm trying to figure that out. I think that's also normal, unfortunately. But yeah, I wish that I could replicate a little bit the attitude I had towards raising kids, because I think I really got quite good at shutting down these voices of people telling you what to do. And in other aspects of my life, I still get my life completely hijacked because I'm going down rabbit holes. And then I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I go back because somebody said I really should do this. I'm like, I did not filter that against what I want. I didn't trust my instincts. I was in a vulnerable place or emotional place. I thought they knew better. And now I'm doing this thing that I don't want, right? And so, yeah, that the stopping that feels like the lifelong work. I'm not sure. I'm getting slightly better at it. That it's such an intriguing juxtaposition that still happens in some sites, whilst it doesn't happen in other sites, right?
I
Yeah.
think everyone has opinions. They all think that they know best of what someone else should do, but very rarely do they take a look at their own life and start there. So there's definitely a lot of outside influences that can creep in, and it makes you second guess yourself. And you mentioned the word self-trust. That's actually the word that I have put in place for myself for 2026,
Oh,
self-trust.
fabulous. Yes.
We oftentimes we trust other people, right? We trust their opinion, we trust their direction, we trust their advice. But how many times do we look back and say, I trust in myself to do this? I trust in myself to be able to make the right choice without someone else telling me what to do. So
Yeah.
I love that you did say that about self-trust.
Yeah.
You have filled us in a lot in regards to your life and what you have done, but I know that now you are doing fractional work. You have your own business. You do public speaking now. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you are doing now and then how people can reach you if they want to get in contact with you?
I've always somewhere thought that maybe I would be good working on my own, but was terrified to do that because the whole business development piece seems to be the most daunting thing that you can imagine. And so I did finally, right? 2 years ago, I pivoted into really putting my very specific consulting business on the market, saying, hey, I want to do this business triage stuff. I want to do the messy cleanups and then help people link up with the specialists they need to then take things further, or help them tee up the internal project teams to fix and climb out of the hole. And it's been an interesting journey because if you are your business, that's again hard. At times, my husband's career has been in a lot of turmoil the last 2 or 3 years. As I said, I have teenagers. So the energy that I have towards developing my business is also the energy I tap into to being a mom, is also affected by the fact if my kids are really disappointed in me, that it touches your self-trust again if there's days like that. So it's not fair to put that back with them. But what I'm proud of is that I'm not quitting, and that I remind myself that hopefully I'll live a ripe old age. My grandparents all lived well in their 90s. That I can say that I really gave this a fair shot and stuck with it and tried to realize that dream, right? I'm doing that, and it's not so simple, but I'm enjoying it. I have a podcast called The Business Emergency Room. As a kid, I've always wanted to be a DJ. So I'm having so much fun with that. The podcast is doing really well. It's quite mature now because I'm a year and a half in, but it's also the joy I get from that. So there are some business choices I'm making where people are saying, well, that ROI on a podcast for a business owner is not amazing. And I'm like, that's fine. The ROI in terms of energy to me is amazing. So I'm going to keep doing this. So yeah, I do the messy stuff. My business is called the Chaos Games Consulting. I'm very active on LinkedIn. If you look for Maartje, Maartje on LinkedIn, I'm the first one you find. The Business Emergency Room is wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can use my services for an hour or for 3 weeks, all of those are good. Just reach out.
Thank you so much again for joining me today. I truly, truly appreciate the conversation and you being real, raw, honest, and giving some great advice, as well as sharing your own personal stories. For all of the listeners and watchers out there, if you need your own moment of clarity, I highly encourage you to download the Clarity in 10. It will be available in the show notes. If this resonated with you today, please share it with a friend, subscribe so you never miss an episode. And until next week, stay fierce, stay bold, but most importantly, stay unapologetically you.